Yeah. So one of the things that we're, obviously David showed us a lot of issues in terms of things that we can do to set up a really strong, robust data set. The question then comes, we talked about sponsors and we talked about institutions, and Janet Cheetham has been around in ophthalmology for a very long time. I've known Janet for probably close to 2 decades.
At least. Yeah.
We're trying to be nice to each other. And Janet started with Allergan, has been with a bunch of different companies, and now works for the Foundation for Fighting Blindness. At this meeting, they had a full day session devoted to IRDs, as they have for years. And lots of companies in development have explained where they're coming and where they're going. What's really nice as the meeting has progressed over the years, it's become more about clinical trials and less about clinical science, which means we're actually getting closer. And Janet can probably give her the perspective of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, because you do help sponsor a good number of these trials based on an endowment and explaining. And they also have a pulse on who needs trials, right? Because again, this has been predominantly an American or U.S. organization, but there are other companies that are doing things in different parts of the world. I mean, one of the companies I was thinking was Blue Rock. It was basically owned by Bayer, but it's based out of Europe. So again, this is an opportunity for her to set, she was nice enough at a very short notice, she was going to explain how Foundation Fighting Blindness works, what's their mission, what's involved, what are the opportunities potentially, because she's fascinated, like most people I talk to, that there's a Latin American consortium and understands that IRDs are not just a US-based thing. They have other manifestations around the world. Without further ado, my long dear friend, Janet, thank you.
So, yes, I've been working in ophthalmology for a very long time. My background is actually in pharmacy. I did a postdoc at Doheny Eye Foundation decades ago. And so that's, and my father was an ophthalmologist. So that's how I got into ophthalmology. It was just, I really loved it, but I didn't want to be an MD. So, but I love the research, and I was at Allergan for a very long time. And when I left Allergan, I went to go help the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Now, full disclosure, I'm not an employee of the foundation. I'm actually a consultant for them. But in the 10 years that I have been working with the foundation, I set up the FFB consortium, and all about that. So we have sites all over the world. We have 30 only in Latin America, quite a few in Europe and in North America. So we have, at present, we're doing natural history studies. But the Foundation Fighting Blindness, they have the main arm of the organization, and then they also have the RD Fund. And the RD Fund has been funded by donors. It's an evergreen fund, and they put money into companies such as, Opus is the one that comes to mind. And so those companies use that money in order to do some of their trials, and then somebody sits on their board of directors. So that's where that part comes in. But on the consortium side, the first thing was to get that entire network up and running. And that has, it is now truly up and running and working very, very well. Our desire is to be able to do a treatment trial in addition to the natural history studies. But of course, the natural history studies are critical to be able to understand what's actually happening in the population. Is the disease progressing bilaterally, and is that progression on a linear basis or not? And that depends on the disease. And then what are the key things that might contribute to the progression, so that when you're doing a clinical trial, probably want to be having an enriched patient population. You want to select patients that are probably going to be progressing faster rather than not, right? Because you don't want, nobody has the money to go do a 5-year follow-up. That's just, it's too expensive. So what sorts of things and populations will get you there faster? So, but ProgStar was a natural history study that was done in Stargards. It was initiated, I think, in about maybe 2012, 2013. By the time I started with the foundation, recruitment was already completed, and much of that data is been reported out. But the data, all of the studies with the foundation, the data sets are out in public domain, so long as the main publication has been reported out. And so anyone can get that data set. I strongly recommend that. One of the things we're also trying to do is to get some additional funding from US government to do some other things, including potentially having a repository of de-identified imaging so that that can be used by anyone, because that imaging is really important, but the process of de-identifying that data, those images, is quite tedious. We don't have the funding for that. Currently, we don't have that bandwidth for it. So, questions?
So you know, Janet, when your organization supports clinical trials, you know, how involved are you in just their calls?
Great question. Fabulous question. Okay, so I'm assuming some of you probably know about the diabetic retinopathy research network. Okay,
Yes.
So
DRCR-net.
DRCR-net. The coordinating center for DRCR-net is a health center based out of Tampa. The coordinating center for the FFP consortium for all the IRDs is also Jake. And I kind of did that on purpose because I knew the people and I thought that they would be doing a fabulous job, and they have. So there are some policies that DRCR-net has in place for working with companies, and those policies will be very similar, not 100% identical, but very similar. One of the requirements is the ability to publish data, because that's in the space where inherited retinal diseases. In order to move the field forward and to get to treatment sooner, everybody must have access to that data. So that's really important. There can certainly be some input on the protocol, but depending on what that disease is, the people who sit on the executive committee probably know more about the disease than the company.
Can you just comment to Janet, you know, what we're planning to do with the consortium in terms of the data and what her opinion is on having that type of.
So we talked about coming up, just for the benefit of everyone else on the call, as you well know, we're trying to work with Clinomics to create proteomics signature per patient per IRD, right? And one of the projects that we spent a lot of time talking about this is we already get reinforcement for a different process, right? Because a lot of our IRDs we have to genetic testing to say it's an IRD. So we already know we're shooting in the right place, right? You know, we talked about this before. We'll send you the kits. We'll go from there. So once we know we have Stargards with 2 ABCA4s, now we know we're not shooting in the dark, right? We kind of narrowed it down. Then we're going to code for 3,000 proteins. We're going to look at a Stanford. Basically, we're going to look and try to figure out, to your point, you said nobody's got the money to watch an IRD progress over 5 years. Who are the people that are going to progress quicker? We're going to have a number of visits over time to see, looking at different modalities. We have imaging modalities like OCTs and autofluorescence and microperimetry. So I'm able to figure some of these things out. And with AI, we can toss that all in and get to some of those numbers and realize that if you might have, I don't know, genetics is not my thing, but if you have this protein that codes for this and it goes for that, and David showed us a lot of these things because he's done it for everything else. This will go back. So then when we go to you, we can have that because you are a nonprofit, you will have a better idea of we're not, we'll really have a targeted population that has very high chance of showing an effect if your drug works.
Now, imagine if we can do a tier film. You already have natural history of these patients, and you already have a database on these patients, and you already have seen which ones have progressed. Imagine if we can now confirm what we find with this, with just a simple tier film test on the patients you've already been following for those years.
That would be awesome. The other thing I haven't mentioned that FFB does, and it's called My Retina Tracker. You guys know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
But they may not.
Yeah.
Okay, so My Retina Tracker is a repository of information for patients with inherited retinal diseases that is worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the patients themselves have to upload data or their healthcare practitioner. They can do it for them. So when it comes to wanting to search for patients, that's so
So in theory, we may be able to get, that would be great.
yeah. So the way it works is obviously a company can't contact the patient directly.
Right.
It has to go, there's like a letter that is sent to the patient turns around.
That's right.
Contacts us.
Or whoever you're.
And I think it's right. I mean, as we get further along in this, we definitely, we have this validated in a number of diseases, NGA, DME, and wet AMD, that I think the reality is it's just a matter of time. We're working on. Yeah. Good question.
Yeah.
Background. So our hope is relatively quickly. One of the reasons I like Latin America and how we started this process is they're very good at getting lots of people in really quickly. But the problem is in America, we wait to the last minute when we're up against the wall before we start doing it. Starting it from the start, I would imagine relatively quickly, we will have an understanding of what we're looking for. And then basically say, look, let's see what people are like this and see. Because again, if we do this backwards, right? You can tell me based on my retina tracker who's got them quick. And then we can run the tests to see they're identified. Or the other way around is that we know what they've got and we correlate somehow their genetics in a different way. We may go, it's like, they come to us, we'll go to them.
Right. So what are the diseases of interest?
We're going to start with ABCA for our starter. What was the other one to start with? Is that our first one?
That's the first one.
Yeah, then maybe we'll start with starter. Because let's be honest.
There's a lot of studies out there for starter.
Right, but there are a lot. So, but remember, for us,
Yeah.
we want this. We're not a sponsor. Yes, we have a sponsor for the diagnostic, but we want. I mean, obviously, for this to be a perpetuating organization, it's going to have to get funding from outside sources. As they're kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall and wondering what sticks, we're happy to say this is what you need to do. So people already put the money into the therapies. So they're not super orphan; they're just orphan.
Right.
And as a result,
Yep.
I mean, I spent a lot of time watching Starburst yesterday on your screen, right? So that's the lowest hanging fruit for me to say.
Except that there's competition out there. That's
Right.
But perhaps not. In Latin America.
I tell you, the recruitment's the key. Oscar, he's, in terms of, our recent experience with the network, what percentage of, on the RP and the Stargardt studies and some of the data that you know of, what percentage reduction did we have in the recruitment from the milestones they were expecting?
Well, we were trying to recruit about 75 patients with Stargardt. For that, we have screened probably about 180.
Mm-hmm.
And the time for that was 6 months.
That's very good.
Right.
But how much time had you given yourselves?
Right.
A year and a half,
18
right?
Year
months.
and a half.
Yeah.
Yeah, for my expectation was a year and a half. So when I came and the CEO says, we expect this in 6 months, I almost died. Yeah. Because I says, how can I do that? But then, I found these fantastic people around, right? That they were all synerging together just to make sure that we have that number of patients. I cannot tell you the amount of money that the company saved. Right? So it's incredible. I consider roughly about $1 million per month.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So if you have 12 months,
And that doesn't count
Saving.
time to market.
right. So that is the kind of thing that really happened here, right? So it's amazing the importance of having some tools that can help recognize the patients correctly, increase the number of screen failures, and number two, speed up the enrollment so you can have the proper diagnosis, coming the patient into the trial and fulfill that. So having the database with the patients, right? Having a database that you have, these are all the patients, genotype like you have in Argentina. That was incredible, easy actually. So the only problem was, can the U.S. embassy give the visa to these patients, right, and fly them? So that was it, and we arranged that too. Right, these guys were
Next episode.
2 day.
He failed me. He promised me. He did not accomplish.
They promised a lot of good things.
No,
They became like
the
a
plan was to
politician.
make to operate those patients in Buenos Aires, but we didn't have time because those guys were so in a rush. So finally, we decided to send patients from Argentina to here, and but we made it in less than 6 months. We put how many? Tell me.
Yeah, we got
How many?
38 patients, almost 40 patients from the 75.
So are those patients going to have their follow-up back at your institution?
Now in the south, so they have to-
Okay.
Trips is paid.
Okay.
hopefully
Okay,
one day,
fine.
but no, the problem is the how do you call it, the blog, no, the blog, del follow up, de agudeza visual, pero que es el test,
The maze. He's talking
Oh,
about-
yeah,
the
the
maze,
maze,
the
yes,
mobility
that's
test.
the problem. We didn't have time to certify and make everything,
Yeah.
because if you had that, we could make that. But no, in 4 months.
But this was because it was last minute.
Yeah.
It was,
If you
yeah.
plan in
We
advance.
plan it in advance, this
Yeah.
is not what's gonna happen. So,
That's-
as I was sitting in your conference yesterday, I was thinking, all these people with these great ideas, if we can move them forward, we get those
Yeah.
answers quickly. And I'll tell you, I really feel, what I saw yesterday there, a lot of those people can be, moved along quickly and get the answers.
Yeah.
And I'd be grateful for these group of patients.
Yeah, sure would.
So,
Absolutely.
That's, which again, we are trying to change the paradigm, right? We're trying to I used the baseball paradigm. We're trying to get the relief pitchers to be the starters. We're trying to show some new technology that changes how we do the, I mean, they're fast to begin with, right? They didn't have this technology that I'm working with them to bring Dave's technology. I just happen to have friends. But the reality is they look what they did using old technology. Oh, we have new technology that we're either going to give you an AC tap or a tier. Good Lord, we're going to be able to because not only going to show you get the patients in fast, that's already there. We're going to get the right patients in, or the patients with the highest probability of success. That's probably a better way of saying it. And then at that point, you don't waste money, and your therapies don't, because you may have a great therapy, but it only works on 15% of patients. You lose on the mean. But if we find those 15%, oncology does this all day long.
Yeah.
We're in the Stone Age.
Great.
any questions from
People online?
people online?
No, I'm okay.
Great. Well, I'll tell you, we've got a lot of exciting things coming, hopefully a lot of exciting partnerships, to move this field forward. I remember when I was at a fellow, everybody avoided you know, our IRD expert, you know, just because there wasn't a whole lot we could do.
Right.
Yeah, and then, you know, Elliot Burson, remember Elliot?
Yeah.
You know, vitamin D and all that, you know?
Yeah.
But boy, you know, he really had a foresight. He knew eventually we'd get these things moving along. And I think we're at the right time. You know, we can really, as a group, have an important impact on how quickly we can understand this disease processes better. And more importantly, you know, identify those patients that we may be able to, you know, help and improve. And we'd love to
Right.
work with you
Yes,
as
yes.
best as we can.
And I mean, you know, what's in it for me personally is legacy, right? You know, my running joke in America, I'm one of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence you never heard of. Right? The 50 people you've never heard of, right? But I mean, to your point, you're not only going to be there. Therapy, I mean, you know, having done 300 clinical trials and I've been doing this for over 20 years, everything that goes in the needle, we were 1% of, right? So in the IRD world, you're all going to be probably bigger than 1% because you put a lot more people in, but you're going to be a percentage to change, you know, what do you leave in life? You know, I don't typically get on the soapbox, I wait to the end, but you're all going to be making a difference in these people's lives. My goal in life has always been one goal. I want to get rid of the stick in the dog. And this is the way to potentially get rid of that stick in the dog for a whole lot of people based on going forward. And obviously Janet spent 10 years of her life, but she's super committed. But now that, you know, we have to wait for the technology, right? It took a while before we get apps for the iPhone. It took a while before we had anti-VEGF technology. Remember in the old days, really old days, I'm not that old. We used to laser you and blind you. But the reality, we've come a long way. I see us being on that same precipice with AI, with this potential genomics, and then our, you know, Foundation for Fighting Blindness is the platform to get the word out to the world. And then they'll say, where did it come from? When that list of sites come up, you don't think other sponsors look at that? You bet they do.
They sure do.
Sure do.
Great.
Anything else from here? Everybody, thank you guys for coming back on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, Janet, thank you very much.
Yeah.